What's up, everybody? This is Ricky.
And this is Angel, and welcome to the
Undefiled
Undefiled
Podcast,
Podcast, where we're all about reclaiming Christian sexuality. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment so you can stay up to date on all of the upcoming podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube and Facebook and the podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts also.
Yep, we are really trying to grow and get this thing off the ground, and we're still trying to find our audience, and we're still trying to figure out, who it is that we know we're called to reach. And so we really want you to be a part of this undefiled community. And this thing is brand new to us. We've never done this before. We're excited about it. We've been having a blast and a great time doing it, but we need you to help us find our audience. So I'm actually one big favor. As you're watching the podcast or listening to podcasts, if you're watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, don't keep it to yourself, man. Share it with somebody. If this is content that adds any kind of value to your life, if it blesses you in any kind of format, we actually do us one big favor. Share it with someone. We've actually already had people, shout out to the people who been coming to us who live in North Carolina where we are, who go to our church, who've been coming to us saying, we've been watching the podcast. It does our hearts, a whole lot of good when we hear that. And we've had some of our people say, look, I sent this to a family member, a brother or sister, and they heard it and it really added value to their lives, and that's the point of us doing this. And so if you feel like this content is good content, we ask that you share it, man. That's the biggest thing. And always follow us on all platforms at Becoming Undefiled. We try to post clips and reels and different things like that to engage with our audience. And we are really trying to build a culture with this undefiled thing. And then also topic for today is culture. And I know Undefiled is about reclaiming Christian sexuality. I know we want to talk about having a great sex life. I know we want to talk about having a great intimate life. Well, you are going into me. Well, I'm going into you, but intimacy life. But the point is what I've learned and what I'm starting to realize is when it comes down to it, sex really isn't about sex.
Right.
It really isn't about sex. A lot of times, if there is an intimate problem in the relationship, if there's an intimacy problem in the relationship, a lot of times there's another area of the relationship that's really affecting the intimacy issue. And sometimes intimacy is the last thing to go away when there is a problem or issue in the relationship. And so if we want to have a great intimacy life, then we really got to ask ourselves, do we have a good culture?
Right. Because the intimacy being gone is really like a side effect to a drug. Like it's a side effect to a medicine. And when you don't have the proper things in place, that side effect can be very loud.
Right, exactly. And so, and if you think about it, that's one of the things that kind of got us to go to marriage counseling. Like when we went to marriage counseling, how long ago?
I think we started, it was like 3 years ago?
Yeah, maybe 2-3 years ago. And one of the things that was, and this is how real this thing is, one of the things that we were finding is that we would go through this. I don't know if other couples, y'all tell me how much of y'all deal with this, but we find ourselves, it's almost like you're married, but you're in roommate mode.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And for us, it was like a cycle of it almost like it kept happening. And we found ourselves in this place where, like, you remember the awkwardness of us coming to bed together, or me laying down, and like, how when you want to talk but you don't really know how to communicate, or you're not ready to communicate, or you just simply don't want to communicate,
right? And
you lay down and you just do the
that big sigh,
and I remember I used to be so dramatic. I adjust my pillow all aggressively,
right?
Turn down. It's like, and in my head I'm saying so much to you in my head,
but nothing is coming out verbally.
Ain't nothing coming out my mouth, but I'm saying so much to you in my head. I've got so much going on within me internally, and I am not expressing it. And we find ourselves like we would have like a good week or a good 2 to 3 weeks, and then you remember how it was,
and then something would happen, and we would just get back into roommate mode. It was almost like a cycle. Like every 3 weeks we were good, and then that 1 week would set us off to a bad mode, and it seemed like it would last forever. and coming out of it was hard.
It was very hard. And that's where I think the disconnection comes first. The disconnection between us came first. And then like after the disconnection, there would be like this weirdness.
Yeah.
Just a weirdness around. I remember like, me, one of the things I had to learn through therapy and through just me dealing with myself and me letting God deal with me is one of the things I had to recognize is a part of that disconnection was whenever I felt any kind of way, I do something called stonewalling where I will isolate myself. And so I would spend all my time in my office or I would spend all my time, in the garage or in the car or wherever I was. But I was finding myself, I was here. Right. But I wasn't here.
You were physically here, but mentally you were out of here.
Right. And sometimes we think your presence doesn't mean you're present.
Ooh. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like and I have to and I had to learn as a husband and as a man that even when I'm not happy with you, I don't get to withdraw my presence from you.
Right.
I still have to present myself to you as your spouse because we made a covenant together. Like we're in this thing together. We're in this relationship together. And one of the things that I had to learn how to do is I don't get to like, I'm starting to realize now it was my own form of immaturity. It was, I don't want to play with you right now. So I'm taking my toys, I'm taking everything that's mine and I'm going to go over here for a minute and I'm going to chill.
Right.
And do you think that's okay for couples to do that to each other? Like at home, do y'all think that it is is there a such thing from what's the difference between space and stonewalling?
So I think stonewalling is completely putting up a wall or removing yourself to the point where you might physically be in the home, but you're not mentally here. You're not mentally active. There's no engagement. There's no, and it's not just that it's no engagement, but there's also no room for it. Like it's not, you're not even leaving hope for any kind of engagement. But then I think that space is something a little different. I think space is something like maybe you've had like a heated argument or something like that. Something that's, some sort of discord and you just need a moment to, separate before you say something you don't want to say.
Right.
And collect your thoughts before you come back together. I don't think it's when you just need space, I don't think it's like you're ignoring or, putting up a block between each other. But when you stonewall, there is literally a block there. Yeah, it's like we can be sitting next to each other and you be completely shut out.
Yeah. And that's happened before. Yeah. And that was kind of where our relationship was, and that's what got us to the place where we sought out marriage counseling. And in marriage counseling, like pretty much the process of marriage counseling was a way for us to really be confronted with the reality. What kind of culture have we created in our relationship?
Right.
And I know couples talk about what's the most important thing in a relationship. If you talk to most people, they say what's the most important thing in a relationship, even when it comes down to intimacy, even when it comes down to your sex life. When you ask most couples what's the most important thing to a relationship, most of us will say communication.
Yep.
Communication. But we have discovered, especially when it comes when you're trying to build something together, especially something like an intimate life, when you're trying to build something like that together, communication is so important. But if you have not created a culture of communication, like the culture of communication, meaning it's not just enough to talk. And I realize every single thing that is successful, every single thing that is thriving, everything lives and dies by culture.
Yeah.
Everything has a culture. You think about the greatest organization on the planet. You think about the greatest business on the planet. You think about anything that's done anything great. It has a culture.
Right.
That's tied to it because the culture is the set of ideals. The culture are the values that govern an environment or a place or in our context, a relationship. And so the question is, every relationship has a culture.
Right.
You have a culture. The question is, does my relationship have a good culture? Does my relationship have a bad culture? And one of the things that you can gauge to know if your relationship is, if the culture of your relationship is good or if it's bad, is look at what's happening. Look at the experiences that you all are regularly having.
Right. What are the cycles, like we were talking about for us? What are the things that regularly occur in your relationship?
Right. Facts.
Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Is it healthy or is it unhealthy? Like, use the weird parts and the disconnection to evaluate where you are, because it really tells you what your culture is. Like, for
does.
us, it's what's crazy about it is we knew that our culture was unhealthy, but we didn't know what to do about it. And we sat in that place for a long time before we went to therapy. Like, for a good little minute. And when we finally went to therapy, we got language for everything that we were experiencing.
Because she and our therapist had to really teach us this disconnection that you guys are feeling, this weirdness that you guys are feeling. What it really is the weirdness and the disconnection is almost an alarm telling you guys something is off.
Right.
Telling you guys you need to evaluate something, and because you are not communicating it, and because you're not being authentic to how you feel in that moment, something in you is now withdrawing and shutting down.
Right.
Because what needs to be expressed is not being expressed. And she had to teach us, and I've had to learn this, and this is so good to me, that is like, well, we talk, but it's not just that we talk. How do we talk?
Right.
It's not just that we communicate that's important, but how do we communicate? And every couple has got to master the culture of communication for their relationship.
Right.
It's so important, and it don't just magically happen.
No, that's something you have to work at.
Right. I think it takes intention, and honestly, I really think, babe, I think communication is a discipline.
It is. It is a discipline, because let's be honest, it's not comfortable. Especially when you go into the how you talk to each other versus what you're talking about. Because it's easy in marriage, especially in our situation. We both are at home all the time. We're both in each other's spaces a lot. So it's easy to talk about anything with each other.
Right.
But the how and how we approach each other, and the consideration and the thought behind how we talk.
Yeah.
Is where we had to learn how to show intentionality.
Yeah, because communication is like, I told you this. I said this to you. The culture of communication is, but the way I said it to you.
Right.
And a lot of times I learned in marriage, it's not always what you say.
It's how you say it.
It's how you say it to your spouse.
It's how you say it.
And sometimes you have to check that tone. Sometimes you got to check that voice. And sometimes it's not just about the fact that you're there and you're present. It's about how are you there.
Right.
It's about how are you present. And one of the things that really has shifted, and I'm going to be real, like, we try to be honest and open as we're doing this pod. I don't ever want to get up here and admit to where we are and where we are not. Like, I don't want to present that we're somewhere that we're not. Like, I can say in full transparency, we have not figured it all the way out yet.
No.
And that's why we're on this journey with every other couple watching this pod to discover how to be a true undefiled couple.
Right.
Because we have had to recognize we still do not have the greatest culture of communication.
Right. It's something we're still cultivating. We're still building it.
Right. Like, we're still working on it. And one of the things that has dynamically, like, there's been a huge dynamic shift in our relationship. And it's one of the things where I remember when we were going through counseling, and every single week she was like, did y'all do the homework? And we'd be like, like, I felt like I was in high school again.
I swear.
Because there was an assignment that she gave us, and it was so difficult because it really confronts. And I really encourage every couple that's watching this or listening, I really encourage you to implement this into your relationship. The art of the intentional check-in. The intentional check-in, where it is something that you bake into your life.
Yeah.
It is something that no matter what's happening that week, no matter how the week goes, no matter what time of day you said it, it's something that both of you said, this is what we're going to do. And we honor it and we stick to it. And you remember how it was when she had first told us to do that? And we're like, yeah, okay, we can do that. And you remember how it was like throughout the week, how hard it was to remember
to do it. And then when we finally did do it, it was like, hey, how you doing this week?
Nah, but you remember how when sometimes when we have the weirdness and when we have the disconnection, and sometimes one of us will say something to break the ice. And finally, when we talk, remember I told you, like, a lot of the times I would stonewall from you, and I would keep, like, how I felt emotionally from you. But then finally, when you and I sat down, and when I actually said to you what I was feeling, like, remember how it was almost like a weight came off of me.
It was.
Like,
I do remember that.
Like what happens is I had to recognize, like, I feel better when I talk to you.
Yeah.
I feel better when I open up and let you into the world that is me. I feel better because now I'm no longer alone with my own thoughts. I'm no longer alone with my own feelings. I'm no longer alone with whatever I was dealing with that I was keeping from you. I brought you into it. And it's in that moment where I really understand why God says you're my helpmeet. I really understand why God says, like, you're my favor.
Right.
Because, like, when I bring you into what I'm dealing with, that's when I start to realize as a husband and as a man, I wasn't created to carry this by myself.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right. And for you, like, it took a weight off of you. But for me, it gave me an understanding of your thought process.
Right.
Like, there were a lot of things that I remember you telling me that I just didn't know. Like, because for a long time, you protected some of the things because you didn't tell me some of the things because you thought you were protecting me.
Yeah, right, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
and
true.
so when you finally told me how you were feeling and how certain things I was doing was affecting you, it was almost like a light bulb click for me. I was like, oh, like when we don't have sex, it's not just about the physical feeling. It's also about what it does for you internally, what it does for you mentally. Like, I didn't connect those things because for me, I always assumed that guys just had higher sex drives than women.
Right.
So I thought it was purely physical, but it's not. And that's something I would have never known if we didn't do those intentional check-ins. Like,
I remember, I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to cut you off, but I remember that conversation that we had where I had to explain to you, like, it's not that I'm angry and it's not that I'm upset and it's not that, it's all about the physical, because I realized early on in our relationship, it would seem like all he wanted sex, like all he wanted sex. And I was trying to say in a way where I remember I finally had to explain it to you. And this is where that culture of communication comes in, because there's a difference between me saying what I feel and me saying what I feel.
right.
Like, I had to recognize that one of the ways that I was getting upset, one of the ways I was getting angry is because we're not having sex. I'm upset about it. I'm upset because we're not having sex.
Right.
That was like the transparent thing. That was like the thing where I'm going to tell you, you want to know what I feel? You ready for it? Here it
Right.
comes. I'm upset. I'm mad at you because, and I will give you the reason. But really what I had to learn to have a better culture of communication in our relationship is that I couldn't just be transparent with you with how I'm feeling, expressing with you how I'm feeling. I needed to express to you what it makes me feel.
Right.
And so I remember the day when I said to you, babe, when you don't touch me, when you and I don't physically connect, I feel like you don't love me. I let myself be vulnerable because for me, even saying it in that moment made me feel weak. It made me feel like I'm a little boy in the corner and you see the rawest, realest version of my emotions. But in that moment, it was a breakthrough because you was like, thank you for saying it to me.
Right.
That way, because I thought you were just this like unsatisfied animal that's insatiable.
Right.
That can't be satisfied. And I'm like, no, like my primary love language is touch.
Yeah.
And so like when you don't touch me, my insecurities flare up. Like when you don't touch me, when you don't engage with me, when I feel like you don't desire me, like I struggle with that. And I shared that with you, and I remember that was a shift in dynamic.
It was, because it finally gave me not just vocabulary for what you were saying, but it gave me the deeper meaning of what you were saying. Like,
Right.
I literally did not know it was affecting you that way.
Right.
I thought that you were just horny or that you just like needed to be physically pleased.
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was more of
It's like an emotion,
it's like an emotional thing, like it feeds your emotion, and I didn't know that.
Right.
Like, and I guess I don't know if it's like what women are taught, that just because guys have a higher sex drive that is purely physical. I don't know if it was that narrative that told me that. I don't know where the thought came from originally, honestly, but like when you finally told me that, it clicked. And I was like, okay, I have to make sure I put in max effort to be able to meet this need for my husband.
Yeah. And I remember like that whole, you guys need to do intentional check-ins where you all sit down and you all determine, and I'm encouraging every couple, man, for real, like implement this into your life. You determine the time, you determine the day, you determine the frequency of it, but there are a set number of things that you ask yourself, and it's pretty much a chance for you to evaluate.
Yeah.
How are we doing?
Yeah.
What are you feeling? what's going on. And it may be awkward and it may be weird at first, but once you get into the practice of sharing things, you train yourself how to express yourself in your relationship. And it makes the relationship better, and it prepares you for like the seasons of life. Because one thing I had to recognize, one thing I believe is true till this day, when it comes to relationships, your culture will trump the season you're in.
It sure will.
Culture trumps seasons. So even if we are in a hard season, if we have built a healthy culture for our communication, a healthy culture for our relationship, because we have a good culture, we can survive the season.
Right. Because let's be honest, like when difficult times hit and when hard things hit, the culture of your relationship is going to determine how you navigate through that thing.
It's down to culture. Like when life hits, when difficulty hits, culture is going to determine how you
get through it.
And so it's even like an encouragement for us. Let's make sure we have a good culture, because that's the thing about life. We don't know what next season is going to be.
We don't.
And life has, and I have to be very, very careful with not letting the season be an excuse for why I'm treating you a certain way.
True. Yeah.
Like we cannot allow the season that we're in to be an excuse for why I'm neglecting you, or why I'm not opening up to you, or why I'm not being affectionate towards you. I have to do the work to build a good culture so that no matter what season comes, we can like look at the season and say, you know what, we're going to be able to make it through this season because we've built the culture. And big seasons come.
They definitely come.
Big
they
seasons
most definitely come.
What would you say are some of the biggest seasons that you need good culture before you walk into them, or you got to get culture quick when you in them?
The biggest one to me is kids.
Yes, Lord, kids
completely change the dynamic in marriage.
Yeah,
like it changes everything. But then it's other things like your health, whether you're in school or like, deaths in the family or loss.
Yeah, I mean, a lot, especially if you're in that millennial age range, like you're in that in the next 10, 20 years, some of us are, you're bearing parents, you're bearing loved ones, you're in major transition. If you're not bearing your parents, sometimes parents get older and they need more care and consideration than they needed before. And it's like, if I wait until those things come,
to prepare
for us to learn how to communicate. And that's the thing you have to recognize when you're a married couple. There's so many external things that are just waiting to divide you.
Yeah.
You have to have an internal determination between the two of you that it's us against the world.
Right. You've got to. And let's be honest, those are the big seasons, but then you have little storms like social media and comparison and all these other kind of things that are like just little bitty storms that come rolling through every once in a while.
Right. And you get to the reality where you understand, while I can't control the season, we can't control the season, but we can control the culture.
Yeah, you can.
I can't control the season that we're in, but we can control the culture that we operate within that season.
Yeah.
And that's why culture is so important. So we got to, and I think there's work that has to be done to build a culture. Meaning, if you have built a culture for intimacy, where it is a value in the relationship, where it's something that we both have declared, this is something that's important to us. We're going to fight for it. Never eat alone. Make sure y'all go back and watch that podcast
that was a really
episode.
Good one.
If that's a culture that you have set, that our intimacy is an important thing to us, it is a priority to us. It's something that we're not going to let anything come before it. We're not going to let anything rob it, whether it's kids, whether it's extracurricular commitments that we both take in, whether we both work full-time jobs, or whether we serve in our church, whatever it is. If we've set a culture of intimacy in our lives, then the culture has to be intentional.
It does.
Like there has to be a commitment to it.
It has to be.
There's real work. It's
real work because it's so important. Like let's just think about it in a really natural mindset kind of way. There are stores that we prefer to go to over others simply because the culture is more inviting.
Facts.
Let's think about it. Target versus Walmart. Where you want to go? We even dress different to go to Target.
You ain't
like
that's true.
because the culture is different there.
Yeah.
Chick-fil-A versus McDonald's.
Yeah.
Like you don't go to McDonald's expecting my pleasure.
My pleasure.
You
My
go to
pleasure.
McDonald's when you're hungry and you don't care if the person has an attitude that gives you your food.
Yeah.
But when you want to have a good day, or if you're having a good day and you want it to continue, you go to Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, everything is marked by its culture.
Everything is marked by its culture.
Everything is marked by its culture.
So if stores and brands are so dedicated to their culture, why aren't we doing that type of dedication to our marriages and our relationships and how we function? Because the culture is just that important.
Every relationship has a culture, and you got to build it.
You've got to.
You got to build it. And so, like, real quick, when we talk about building a culture, if this episode is helping y'all so far, if this is good content so far, make sure y'all share, like, and subscribe to share this with somebody. But as you're building a culture, when it comes to building a culture, I believe the 3 things that you have to have. Number one, if you're going to build anything with anybody, whether you're in an organization, whether it's a marriage, whether it's school, whether it's church, I don't care what it is.
Yeah.
If you are engaged in anything, the first thing you have to look at is care.
Yeah.
Do you care? And not just your care. It's not just the care of like me doing something. I'm talking about the care of the feelings of like the idea. The idea you have about them. Like I have to ask myself as your husband, number one, what is my idea of you? As your man, as your husband, what is my idea of you as a wife? What is my idea of you as a woman? And then I've got to ask myself right behind that, where did it come from? Like where did it come from? Because I have to make sure me being in a relationship with you, I'm here. But if I'm here, the prerequisite for me treating you the right way and me being the kind of man you need me to be, I need to have the right idea about you as my wife.
You do?
Like if I sit and think like, and this is where abuse happens. Abuse happens when you fail to understand what you have.
Right.
And whatever you don't understand, you're going to abuse.
Right. And I think that a lot of the times we don't address the where did it come from question. Like my idea of you is based off of something I've seen before. Yeah. And so was that something healthy or unhealthy? Like for me, I came from a broken home. My mother was single. I didn't really have a relationship with my father. So for a husband and wife, I didn't see that. So I literally had no idea what a husband and wife looked like and how they were supposed to interact. Yeah. I got that from the other couples that I saw around because we were so heavily embedded in our church. Yeah. I got somewhat of a front row seat to like your parents. Yeah. And some of the other, like the elders and whatnot, some of their relationships, I got to see that. So it gave me somewhat of an idea of what a husband should be. And so if you don't know the where it came from, it's hard to identify what you think about your spouse. Yeah. And honestly, the opposite of care is not caring. It's disrespect. It is. It's disrespect. And I have to recognize, I know this is a hard statement, but having the wrong idea about your spouse, it almost leaves the door open for you to disrespect them. Yeah. Like if I was never taught what a wife was, if I was never taught how to treat a wife, if I was never taught like she don't exist to just jump and skip at your every beck and command, that your wife is not just a bucket for you to dump stuff in. You know what I'm saying? Like it is like she's actually another individual that I equally have to care about her concerns, her feelings, her emotions. Like I have to care enough about you to study you and want to know how you operate. Right. Instead of making you fit into the idea of a wife that I have. Right. Like, what's that post where the girl was on that date with that guy and he was like, like, I feel like, you was telling me something a couple days ago about she was on a date and he was like, pretty much like, he was saying, I want my wife to stay at home and have the kids and whatnot. And I'll give her money for the bare essentials, for the basics, food and diapers and stuff for the house. And the girl asks, so like, what if your wife wants to go out to coffee with some friends and stuff? He was like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I was flabbergasted. My flabbers were gasted. But at the same time, look, for all y'all who are not married yet and who are dating, if someone gives you their idea about you,
and it is not something that you want to subscribe to, that is the moment you run.
You better run.
That's the moment you say, check, please. And how many of us married people who had the wrong idea about us? And am I saying that every marriage starts off with the right idea about each other? Absolutely not, because none of us would be married successfully if that was the case. Meaning the first couple of years of marriage, and some of us many years into marriage, we have to learn, I have to learn the right idea about this thing called marriage. I have to learn the right idea about this thing called my spouse. And that's a journey, but I realize it makes it a whole lot easier to get there when you care enough to learn them.
Yeah, you have to care.
Like at the end of the day, you ain't got to be talented and you ain't got to be perfect, but you got to care.
You got to.
There's not much you can do with someone who don't care. There's not a lot can be done with someone who doesn't. You cannot build a culture with someone who doesn't care.
Right.
And so I have to ask myself, the first question is, when we're building a culture, do we care?
Yeah.
Like, do we care? You have to have care. And then number two, I think is different, but you have to have concern. Like you have to have genuine concern. Like I remember when we and this is when I knew marriage counseling was going to be. This is when I knew marriage counseling was going to be a journey, because I remember we were in a session and you got really emotional in that session, and as you were crying, you stopped crying eventually, and then the therapist, she asked me, she said, Ricky, were you hearing what your wife was saying? I said, yeah, I was hearing, I was listening. And she was like, I noticed that while your wife was expressing that emotion that was really hard for her, I noticed you didn't try to make any kind of contact or any kind of comfort. She was like, do you care? And I was like, yeah, I care. But she was using it as an analogy to show me that sometimes in a relationship, me knowing that I care isn't enough. When I'm really concerned about you, it's important for me to engage with what I see. It's important for me to not just know that I care, but it's important for me to express myself in a way where you know I care. Right.
You have to engage with each other with care.
You have to engage with care. And it's almost like you have to be concerned to the level of, did she see it? Right. It's like, I love her, but does she see it? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like I have to, and that has to be my concern. Like it can't just be like, some dudes be like, why you tripping? I came home, didn't I? I came home, didn't I? I could have been out here slinging it and slacking it. I could have been doing A, B, C, and D. But sometimes I realize the importance of having care, because if it's when you're not clear, when you cannot see concern coming from your spouse, me as your husband, then it's going to be a breeding ground for contempt. Listen, family, be sure to stay tuned for part 2 of this conversation on culture right here at the Undefiled Podcast. We'll see you next week.